Mirmanjis, everybody. That's good morning from Albania. It's a sunny day here. Unfortunately, in my studio, aka my back bedroom, there's a lot of noise coming through the window. There's a lot of music coming from the coffee shops outside, and somebody's jackhammering concrete. So that's the current state. I hope you'll forgive if you hear any noise in the background. Let's talk about 2 Kings chapter 21. Unfortunately, this is not going to be a high point in the history of the nation of Judah. It's actually probably the lowest point up until this point that we've talked about. So let's get into this and talk about when these events happened. Our PDF has all of this information. You can download it on our website for free. We're going to talk about two kings primarily, Manasseh and Amon. They reigned from approximately 700 to 635 BC, so several decades. The map today is pretty simple. We're just going to be in one location. That's Jerusalem, which was the capital of Judah. Our key character section is made up of three kings. The first one is Manasseh. He was the son of King Hezekiah. Remember, Hezekiah was a good king. He was a godly king. His son Manasseh was not. That's who we're going to talk about primarily in our outline section. He unfortunately reigned over Judah for 55 years and had a corrupting influence. And then his son Amon took the throne after him. He was not a good king either. He reigned for 2 years. And then very briefly at the end of the chapter, we'll talk about Josiah, and we'll talk more about his reign in the upcoming chapters. So that finishes up page number 1. Let's go over to page number 2 now and talk about Manasseh's reign in Judah, verses 1 through 18. Hezekiah died, and his son Manasseh took the throne, and he didn't follow in his father's footsteps. He was evil. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. The text tells us that in Manasseh's day, Judah was actually so evil that they were worse than the nations that God had originally kicked out of the promised land when he gave it to the Israelites back during Joshua's day. So this evil has kind of come full circle now. The next part of the text basically just gives us a list of all the terrible things that Manasseh did. So he rebuilt the high places, these places of unauthorized sacrifices that his father Hezekiah had done such a good job in tearing down. He rebuilds them. He participated in the, quote, despicable practices of the idolatrous nations. He, quote, shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another. That's verse 16. He rebuilt worship sites for idols like Baal and Asherah. He even dedicated altars to what the gods described as the hosts of heaven, and he put them inside the temple in Jerusalem. So not only now is Judah filled with idolatrous worship and Jerusalem filled with idolatrous worship, but now these idols have even been moved into God's temple, the temple that Solomon built. The text goes on and it tells us that he welcomed fortune tellers and necromancers and mediums. They were specifically forbidden in the law given to Moses. He took part in the horrible practice of sacrificing children. He even sacrificed some of his own children. This was something that God really, really hated. As a judgment for this wickedness, God decreed that a terrible disaster would be brought upon Jerusalem and Judah. Quote, I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. So basically God's going to, wipe over the city of Jerusalem, turn it over, dump it all out. There's going to be nothing left. God said that he was going to forsake Judah and give them over into the hands of their enemies, much like he had to Israel in the north in 2 Kings chapter 17. But this judgment was not going to come during Manasseh's time. Manasseh ends up dying after reigning 55 years. This judgment is pending, but it's not here yet, and it's not going to get here for several decades, but it is going to come because Judah has reached the point of no return in their evil. The chapter concludes in verses 19 through 26. Amon reigns in Judah for just a short period of time. After Manasseh, his son Amon takes the throne, reigns for just 2 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, like his father. The text says, quote, he abandoned the Lord, the God of his father. So he abandons God, nothing to do with him, right? Amon's servants assassinated him after his 2 years on the throne, and Josiah, his son, is going to take the throne at a very young age, and we will talk about him in the upcoming chapters. So that is 2 Kings chapter 21. It is a low point in the nation of Judah. Now let's talk about our application and think about that a little bit more and how we might be able to keep that from happening in our own time. It only takes one generation for everything to fall apart and for people to forget God. There was only one generation between Hezekiah, a high point in Judah, and Manasseh, the lowest point in Judah's history. And the application, I think, for this, one application, there are many, but we need to give every generation of our children our best effort as parents. We should never assume that just because previous generations of our family was faithful, that therefore our children are going to be faithful and they're going to go in the right direction. Every generation of children need to be poured into by loving, godly, committed parents who are intentional about instilling love for God in their children to the best of their ability. The failure of just one generation can have devastating consequences. I think perhaps we've seen this, at least maybe in the American culture, where, well, our family's been Christian for 3 generations, and so I'm not going to be maybe as intentional as I really need to be. I'm not going to be as dedicated to the upbringing of my child because there's an assumption that, well, they'll kind of fall in line with the rest of the family and everything will be fine. They'll be faithful to God. Not necessarily, and I think we're seeing that as our culture secularizes, people pushing away, moving away from the faith of their family, especially when it's just a traditional passed down faith, rather than one that the parents were very intentional about passing down and communicating the importance of it, communicating the beauty of God and all that He's done for us.